In the heart of Las Vegas, under the blinding floodlights of the Grand Arena, two champions stood ready to prove that youth conquers legacy. What began as a night of celebration turned volatile when arrogance met experience and two living legends decided to answer a public insult in person. Ryder Kane wasn't your typical MMA star. For 7 relentless years, he had been the face of modern combat sports, known for ending fights before the first minute was over. And Suri Prazert wasn't your typical Muay Thai prodigy. For over a decade, he dazzled crowds across Asia, famed for spinning knees, flying elbows, and a showman's grin that masked a ruthless edge. When the two fighters challenged Chuck Norris and Seagal before a roaring crowd, they thought they were untouchable. But when the legends rose from their seats and stepped into the cage, the entire arena realized the show was over. What began as a spectacle of dominance would become a study in humility. And when the lights faded over the Grand Arena, two legends walked away untouched, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than any victory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Las Vegas Grand Arena pulsed with raw energy. Every seat filled, every voice blending into a deafening roar that echoed off the walls. Floodlights beamed down onto the polished octagon at center stage. Cameras flashed like lightning as fans shouted from every corner. Some waved banners, others leaned forward on the edge of their seats, eyes locked on the fighters. The night's energy felt alive, almost electric, charged with the promise of something big. "Ladies and gentlemen!" Mason Holt's voice thundered through the speakers. The veteran announcer's words rolled across the arena with practiced precision. "Welcome to the main event of Apex Championship Night." The crowd's response shook the building's foundation. In the middle of this chaos, two men sat calm and composed in the VIP section. Chuck Norris, dressed in a simple black shirt and jeans, his weathered face a map of decades of discipline. Beside him, Seagal, in his signature all-black attire, ponytail immaculate, eyes half-lidded but missing nothing. They did not move, no entourage, no attention-seeking. Yet eyes naturally shifted toward them. They sat effortlessly still, Chuck's hands resting loosely on his knees, Seagal's folded in his lap. No grins, no cheers, just focus. Their eyes never left the cage. All eyes inside, however, centered on one man, the undefeated young fighter whose name everyone had chanted earlier. Ryder Kane, a rising star. Not just for his skill but for how he won. Arrogant, flashy, ruthless. He thrived on spectacle, lived to dominate not only his opponent but the crowd. Every move he made seemed calculated to provoke a reaction. He bounced on his heels, glancing at the cameras, soaking in the attention. Fans either loved him or hated him, but no one ignored him. Across the cage stood his opponent, a seasoned veteran with years of fights under his belt. Respected. Not flashy, not arrogant, the kind who let his skills speak quietly. But none of that mattered tonight. From the moment the bell rang, Ryder attacked. Fast, aggressive, sharp, relentless. His strikes came in hard, giving his opponent no space to breathe. The veteran fought back, but the younger man controlled the pace as if he had something to prove. It ended brutally. A quick combination, a clean hit to the jaw, and the veteran hit the mat hard. The sound of impact echoed. The referee dove in, signaling the fight was over. Medics rushed into the cage, checking if the fallen fighter could move. The crowd erupted. Some fans screamed wildly, thrilled by the show. Others shifted uncomfortably at how fast, how ruthless it had been. But Ryder didn't care. He strutted around the cage, arms raised high, flexing for cameras, playing to the crowd, sweat dripping, grin wide. He shouted at the fans, mocking his opponent openly. No humility, no restraint. "Is that all you got?" he roared, circling the fallen man. "I barely broke a sweat." Commentators barely had time to react before he grabbed the mic from Mason Holt. "That's how it's done, in the new era." His voice boomed across the arena. "None of that old school wait and see garbage. This is real fighting. This is domination." Yet amidst all this noise, Chuck Norris and Seagal remained perfectly still. While the arena erupted, they sat shoulders relaxed, gazes sharp, expressions unreadable. They watched everything. Every move, every taunt. They didn't clap. They didn't react. They simply observed. The spectacle continued as the night's co-main event approached. The energy shifted subtly as the announcer's voice returned. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, our Muay Thai showcase fight." The spotlight swiveled to the entrance tunnel as Suri Prasert emerged, draped in a golden robe emblazoned with Thai script. Unlike Ryder's raw aggression, Suri moved with theatrical flair, every gesture a performance. Where Ryder was American brashness, Suri was international showmanship. As he entered the ring, he performed an elaborate Y, the traditional Thai greeting before spinning in a circle, arms extended, drinking in the adulation. His opponent, a respected Thai veteran, entered with a humble nod and traditional prayer ritual. Their fight was a study in contrast, the veteran's disciplined, traditional approach against Suri's flamboyant, crowd-pleasing style. Suri threw spinning elbows where straight ones would do, added flourishes to his knee strikes, played to the crowd between exchanges. And like Ryder before him, he dominated not through raw power, but through speed and spectacle. When the end came, it was with a flying knee that seemed designed more for cameras than combat effectiveness. It connected nonetheless, sending his opponent crashing to the canvas. Suri didn't wait for the referee's official call. He leapt onto the cage, performing a mock bow toward the crowd, his smile blindingly white against his sweat-slicked skin. "That's real Muay Thai," he shouted as he grabbed the microphone. "Not that slow, boring stuff from the old tapes. This is evolution, baby." The cameras panned across the arena, catching the contrast between the celebrating young fighter and the two legends sitting motionless in the VIP section. The director held the shot longer than necessary, highlighting the visual dichotomy. After both victories, the post-fight interviews began. Ryder, still breathing heavily but energized by his win, stood beside Tina Morales, the arena's lead reporter. Her sharp eyes assessed him as she positioned her microphone. "Ryder, an impressive victory tonight. Some would say dominant. What's next for you?" Ryder laughed, cocky and unrestrained. "What's next? Whatever I want. There's nobody in this division who can touch me." He wiped sweat from his brow with a branded towel. "You know what the problem is with fighting today? Too much respect. All these guys bowing and hugging after trying to knock each other out. It's fake." Tina raised an eyebrow. "Speaking of respect, we have some legends in attendance tonight. Chuck Norris and Seagal are ringside. Any thoughts on having them watch your performance?" The question was professional, neutral. But something shifted in Ryder's expression, a glint of opportunity. "Chuck Norris?" He laughed, looking directly at the camera. "Look, I respect what those guys did in their era. But let's be real, that was movie fighting. This," he gestured around the octagon, "this is real. Those guys would last 30 seconds in today's game." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheering Ryder's brashness, others murmuring in disapproval. The camera cut to Chuck and Seagal. Nothing in their expressions changed. Not a flicker. Suri joined the interview area minutes later, still riding his victory high. When Tina asked him a similar question about the legend's presence, he went even further than Ryder. Steven Seagal? Suri mimicked a slow-motion Aikido move, drawing laughter from parts of the crowd. I love his movies. But come on. That's choreography, not fighting. I'd love to see his Aikido work against my elbows. He pantomimed a dramatic falling motion. Maybe he could teach me to fall dramatically for my next movie deal. Mason Holt, the veteran announcer, laughed nervously into his microphone, trying to diffuse the growing tension. Strong words from our champions tonight. Remember, folks, styles evolve, but respect for the pioneers of mixed martial arts is. But Ryder had already snatched a wireless mic from a nearby production assistant. He wasn't finished. Hey, Chuck! He called out, his voice cutting across the arena. Every head turned, every camera swiveled. Why don't you come down here? Show us if those roundhouse kicks work outside of Walker, Texas Ranger. The arena fell into a hush, then scattered nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't planned bravado. The production director frantically signaled to cut Ryder's mic, but it was too late. Suri, not to be outdone, grabbed his own microphone. Seagal, I've got some wrist locks for you, master. He performed an exaggerated bow. Maybe you can show me your deadly touch technique. More laughter, but uncomfortable now, edged with uncertainty. The camera held steady on Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Chuck's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Seagal's mouth tightened at the corners. Then a glance between them. No words. Just a look. Tina Morales stepped forward, professional enough to recognize when things were spiraling. Gentlemen, let's keep the focus on tonight's incredible performances. But it was too late. The crowd, sensing drama, began to chant, Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. Another section answered, Seagal, Seagal. Social media exploded in real time. Clips of the challenges were already trending. Arena screens displayed tweets appearing by the second. Did Kane just call out Chuck Norris? Someone tell Suri that Seagal doesn't need scripts to break arms. Number respect the legends. Mason Holt's voice came through the speakers, trying to regain control. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to all our fighters tonight. But his words faded as the unthinkable happened. Chuck Norris stood up. A ripple of silence spread from the VIP section outward, like a stone dropped in still water. Beside him, Steven Seagal rose as well. Neither spoke. Neither gestured. They simply stood, eyes locked on the cage where Ryder and Suri were still celebrating. The crowd's roar died to a murmur, then to whispered awe. Ryder's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, wider and more forced. Suri's theatrical poses stilled as he watched the legends take their first steps toward the octagon. Chuck moved with the same efficiency that had defined his career, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Seagal glided alongside him, hands loose at his sides, eyes never leaving the cage. The crowd parted before them like water. Security staff, uncertain whether to intervene, stepped back at a small shake of Chuck's head. Cameras tracked their every step. The arena's massive screens showed their approach from multiple angles, the weathered discipline in Chuck's face, the cold calculation in Seagal's eyes. And for the first time all night, Ryder Kane and Suri Prazert stood perfectly still, watching the legends approach, suddenly aware that some challenges, once issued, cannot be taken back. The Las Vegas Grand Arena had hosted countless moments of sports history, but nothing like this. The crowd's energy transformed from the frenzy of victory celebrations to something electric and uncertain. Every eye, Every camera lens tracked Chuck Norris and Seagal as they approached the octagon with unhurried deliberation. Social media exploded with real-time reactions. Phones lifted everywhere, capturing the moment from hundreds of angles. The production team, scrambling to adapt to this unscripted development, switched to a multi-camera split screen. Ryder and Suri in the cage, still holding their microphones. Chuck and Seagal walking forward with measured steps. The crowd's faces transitioning from amusement to anticipation. Mason Holt's voice quavered slightly as he attempted to narrate the unfolding situation. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we're witnessing an unprecedented moment in combat sports history. Inside the cage, Ryder Kane maintained his cocky grin, but something flickered behind his eyes, the first shadow of doubt. He glanced at Suri, who responded with a theatrical shrug before adjusting his championship belt over his shoulder. "Looks like the senior citizens are coming to congratulate us," Ryder said, his voice carrying through the microphone but lacking its usual conviction. Suri forced a laugh. "Maybe they want autographs." The jokes fell flat against the arena's growing tension. Chuck and Seagal reached the edge of the platform. Without hesitation, security opened the gate. The legends stepped into the octagon. Two men in their 70s entering a domain ruled by fighters half their age. Yet something in their presence made the space feel suddenly smaller. Chuck stood straight, his weathered face unreadable, hands loose at his sides. Decades of discipline had stripped away any need for posturing. Beside him, Seagal's eyes swept across the cage with cold assessment, ponytail immaculate. His stillness somehow more threatening than any movement could be. Ryder cleared his throat, camera-ready smile firmly in place. Well, if it isn't the legends themselves. Come to see how real fighting's evolved since your day. Chuck didn't respond. Not with words. His eyes clear, focused, unblinking, locked onto Ryder's, with an intensity that made the younger man's smile falter. Suri, refusing to be overshadowed, stepped forward with exaggerated movement towards Seagal. "Master Seagal," he said, performing a mocking bow. "Honor us with your wisdom. Tell us, do those wrist locks actually work without stunt coordinators?" Seagal's expression remained unchanged, but he tilted his head slightly, a predator assessing prey. The crowd's murmurs grew, uncertain whether they were watching comedy or something far more consequential. Mason Holt, sensing the shift, stepped closer to the cage. "Gentlemen, perhaps we should—" "No." Chuck's voice cut through the arena. A single word, spoken not loudly but with such clarity and command that it silenced everything. "Let them finish." Those 4 words carried weight that transcended volume. Chuck's Texas drawl remained as it had always been measured, unhurried, certain. Ryder's confidence visibly wavered. He glanced at the crowd, seeking the validation that had always fueled him, but found only tense anticipation. He adjusted his stance, unconsciously squaring his shoulders. "Look, I meant no disrespect," he began, his tone suddenly defensive. "Just saying fighting's evolved, that's all. These days it's about what?" Seagal spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly soft, yet carrying to every corner of the arena. "Show us." The challenge hung in the air. Simple, direct, impossible to dismiss. Tina Morales stepped forward, professional instincts kicking in. "Perhaps we should return to our scheduled program." "No," Ryder interrupted, pride overriding his momentary doubt. "No. They want to see evolution. Let's show them." He handed his championship belt to a cornerman and rolled his shoulders. The athlete in him couldn't back down now, not with millions watching, not with his reputation at stake. "Just a friendly demonstration, right? No hard feelings when it's over?" Chuck's expression remained neutral. "None." Seagal said nothing, but his slight nod carried volumes. Suri, never one to be outdone, stripped off his robe. 2-on-2 then? Old school versus new school? His voice carried the forced bravado of a man committed to a path he'd begun to doubt. The referee approached uncertainly. "Sir, this isn't sanctioned. Exhibition," Chuck clarified, making eye contact with the official. "No judges. No scores." Something in his tone made further argument impossible. The referee nodded and stepped back. Mason Holt found his voice again, professional instincts taking over. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we're about to witness an impromptu exhibition. In an unprecedented turn of events, our champions have issued a challenge to the legends in attendance." The crowd roared back to life, phones raised higher, social media ablaze with real-time commentary. The production director signaled frantically, ensuring every camera angle was covered, knowing this moment would be replayed for years to come. Chuck removed his jacket, handing it to a security guard. Beneath it, a simple black t-shirt revealed arms still defined by decades of training. Seagal remained in his silk shirt, merely adjusting his sleeves with deliberate calm. "Should we get them some protective gear?" one of the cornermen whispered loudly enough to be heard. Ryder laughed, some of his confidence returning. "I don't think we'll be making that much contact." He turned to the crowd, playing to the cameras. "We'll be gentle, folks. Wouldn't want to damage the relics." Scattered laughter followed, but it was nervous, uncertain. Suri circled to one side of the octagon, his movements exaggeratedly loose and flashy. "Traditional stance, Master Seagal? Or something from your movies?" He bounced on his toes, throwing shadow combinations that ended with flourishes. Seagal watched him without comment, hands clasped loosely in front of him, as still as stone. At the center of the cage, Ryder and Chuck faced each other. The contrast was stark. Ryder's muscled frame, fight shorts emblazoned with sponsor logos, tattoos across his chest, showcasing his victories. Chuck in simple clothes, no outward displays, nothing to prove. "So how do we do this?" Ryder asked, bouncing lightly. "Point system? First to tap?" Chuck's response was characteristically minimal. "Movement only. No impact." Ryder scoffed. "Afraid of getting hurt?" The barest hint of something, not quite a smile, touched Chuck's lips. "Just setting parameters." The referee glanced between them, then shrugged and raised his hand. "Exhibition only. At my command, you stop immediately. Understood?" Nods all around. The referee stepped back and signaled, "Begin." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The arena held its collective breath. Then Ryder, impatient as always, struck first, a probing jab toward Chuck's midsection, fast but controlled. It was a measure of distance, a test. Chuck didn't block. He wasn't there. A minimal shift of his torso so subtle, many missed it, and the punch found only air. Ryder blinked in surprise before launching a combination jab, cross, leg kick movements that had devastated opponents across multiple championships. Each strike was technically perfect, explosively fast. None connected. Chuck moved with impossible economy. No dramatic dodges, no theatrical counters, just not being where the strikes landed. It seemed as if he knew where each attack would go before Ryder himself did. Across the cage, Suri launched a flashy offensive against Seagal, a spinning elbow transitioning to a flying knee, the kind of combination that had made him famous on highlight reels. Seagal's response was different from Chuck's, but equally devastating. Where Chuck evaded, Seagal redirected. His hands barely seemed to move, yet somehow Suri's momentum carried him past his target, his balance compromised with each attack. The Aikido master never struck. He simply ensured that Suri's own energy worked against him. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The crowd fell silent, witnessing something they couldn't quite comprehend. These were no movie techniques. This wasn't choreography. This was decades of mastery condensed into pure efficiency. Ryder's frustration mounted visibly. His combinations grew more aggressive, his breathing more labored, while Chuck remained calm, almost serene. After a particularly wild exchange that connected with nothing but air, Ryder stepped back, eyes wide. "How are you?" Before he could finish, Chuck moved. Not aggressively, not with power, but with such precision that Ryder found himself instinctively backing up, defensive instincts firing. Chuck hadn't struck him, hadn't even touched him yet. Ryder retreated as if from an overwhelming force. Suri wasn't faring any better. His flashy techniques, stripped of their effectiveness by Seagal's subtle redirections, began to look increasingly desperate. After a flying strike that resulted in him nearly falling, Suri landed awkwardly, breathing hard, sweat dripping despite the brief exchange. "This isn't real fighting," he protested. "In a real match." "In a real match," Seagal interrupted softly. "Intent matters. Purpose matters." His hands remained loose at his sides. "Show me yours." Something in the challenge ignited Suri's pride. His expression hardened, and he launched forward with genuine intent. A brutal elbow strike aimed at Seagal's head, followed by a knee that would have devastated any normal opponent. Seagal moved. It wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic. It was efficient to the point of being almost boring. A slight turn, a minimal redirection with his forearm, and suddenly, Suri was on the ground. Not thrown, not struck. Simply placed there by his own momentum, controlled by Seagal's positioning. The crowd gasped. Phones captured the moment from every angle. Suri looked up, genuine shock replacing his theatrical confidence. Meanwhile, Ryder had committed fully to a combination against Chuck, a technical masterpiece of modern MMA. Hook, uppercut, leg kick, all flowing together in championship form. Chuck's response was both simple and devastating. A sidestep so minimal it was almost invisible, followed by a single hand placed against Ryder's extended arm. Not a strike. Not a grab. Just placement. Ryder found himself off balance, momentum carrying him forward into empty space. He stumbled, nearly fell, caught himself at the last moment. The entire exchange had lasted less than 30 seconds, yet it felt to everyone watching like witnessing years of martial arts philosophy condensed into moments. The champions hadn't been beaten, they'd been educated. Mason Holt's voice broke the silence, subdued with genuine awe. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure what we just witnessed, but..." Ryder straightened, face flushed with a complex mix of emotions: embarrassment, confusion, anger, and something else. Something that looked suspiciously like the beginning of respect. "That wasn't fighting," he said. But the accusation lacked conviction. Chuck regarded him calmly. "No, it wasn't. That was understanding," Seagal added, helping Suri to his feet with surprising gentleness. The crowd remained hushed, sensing they were witnessing something beyond sport. A lesson in humility delivered without a single blow landed. Tina Morales approached the cage, microphone ready, professional enough to recognize the historical significance of what was unfolding. "Chuck, would you care to comment on what just happened?" Chuck looked directly into the camera, his weathered face serious. "Fighting isn't about domination. It's about mastery. Not over others. Over yourself." His words echoed through the arena. Simple, direct, profound. Ryder stood frozen. Champion's bravado stripped away, suddenly looking much younger than his 27 years. For perhaps the first time in his professional career, he found himself without a ready comeback, without a practiced response. Suri, recovering his composure, attempted to salvage his dignity. That's fine in a controlled environment, but in a real fight. Would you like to see a real fight? Seagal asked quietly, the question carrying no threat, simply genuine inquiry. The silence that followed was deafening. The Las Vegas Grand Arena held its collective breath. The silence was total, oppressive, as if the very air had been vacuumed from the massive space. Thousands of spectators, moments ago roaring with excitement, now sat motionless. Phones still raised, but forgotten in hands that didn't dare move. Even the production crew, veterans of countless sporting spectacles, stood transfixed behind their equipment. In the center of the octagon, time seemed suspended. Would you like to see a real fight? Seagal's question hung in the air, not as a threat, but as a genuine philosophical inquiry. His eyes, calm, assessing, unblinking, remained fixed on Suri, who had unconsciously taken half a step backward. Chuck Norris stood perfectly still beside Seagal, his weathered face unreadable, hands relaxed at his sides. Nothing in his posture suggested aggression, yet something in his presence made the cage feel suddenly smaller, as if the very space had contracted around the four men. Ryder Kane cleared his throat, glancing toward the arena's massive screens, where his own face was displayed in high definition. Flushed, uncertain, stripped of its usual arrogance, he became acutely aware of how this moment would be replayed, analyzed, memed across the internet within minutes. Career-defining. Perhaps career-ending. Look, he began, forcing confidence back into his voice. This is all great for the cameras, right? Old school, new school? He attempted a laugh that came out hollow. The fans are loving it. But the fans weren't loving it. They were witnessing something they'd never expected. Vulnerability from fighters who'd built careers on projected invincibility. Mason Holt, veteran announcer with decades of experience, found himself struggling for words. When he finally spoke into his microphone, his usual bombast was replaced with something approaching reverence. Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing something unprecedented here tonight. 2 generations of martial arts philosophy, face to face in the octagon. Suri, never comfortable with silence, filled the void with movement. He bounced lightly on his toes, circling Seagal with forced nonchalance. Reality is different from philosophy, though, isn't it? In real combat? You've never been in real combat, Seagal stated. Not an accusation, simply fact. Suri faltered mid-step. I've fought the best in the world. In a ring. With rules. With referees. Seagal's voice remained soft, yet carried to every corner of the arena. With cameras. With medical staff standing by. He gestured minimally around them. This is sport. Admirable. Technical. Valuable. A pause. But not combat. The distinction hung heavy in the air. Chuck's Texas drawl joined in, unhurried and measured. What you do takes tremendous skill. Nobody here is saying otherwise. His eyes held Ryder's steadily. But there's a difference between dominating an opponent and mastering yourself. Something in the phrasing struck Ryder. His posture shifted subtly, defensive pride giving way to grudging curiosity. And you've mastered yourself? The question came out less challenging than he'd intended, almost genuine. Chuck didn't answer immediately. When he did, His response was disarmingly honest. No. Still working on it. Every day for 50 years. The humility in the statement was so unexpected, so contrary to the bravado-driven world of professional fighting, that Ryder found himself momentarily speechless. Tina Morales, sensing a pivot point in the unfolding drama, stepped closer to the cage. Ryder, Suri, you've both dominated your divisions with undeniable skill. What's it like facing men who shaped martial arts before you were born? The question was a professional lifeline, an opportunity to save face, to reframe the narrative. Suri started to respond with his usual theatrical flair, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the weight of Seagal's steady gaze, or perhaps something deeper was beginning to penetrate his carefully constructed persona. It's different, he admitted, uncharacteristically subdued. Not what I expected. Ryder nodded slowly, competitive instinct warring with dawning recognition. Yeah, there's something. He struggled to find words for concepts he'd never considered. When you train to win fights, you think that's all there is. Winning. His eyes met Chuck's again. But that's not what this is about for you, is it? Chuck shook his head once. Never was. The crowd remained silent, witnessing not the spectacle they'd paid for, but something far rarer, authentic realization unfolding in real time. Mason Holt, reading the room perfectly, lowered his voice to match the moment's gravity. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we're witnessing something beyond sport tonight, a passing of knowledge that transcends competition. But the philosophical moment was abruptly shattered as Ryder's coach shouted from outside the cage. Don't let them get in your head, Ryder. This is psychological warfare. They can't match your speed, your power. The interruption broke the spell. Ryder straightened, glancing at the expectant faces surrounding the octagon. Thousands of fans, sponsors, social media. His entire brand, built on unshakable confidence. Something hardened in his expression. Talk is great for selling tickets, he said, voice regaining its edge. But this is the real world. In here, he gestured around the cage. It's about who's better. Period. He settled into his fighting stance, the fluid motion of a man who'd performed the action thousands of times. So let's settle it, for real. Across the octagon, Suri's theatrical instincts reawakened. He couldn't let Ryder claim the spotlight alone. Yes. Enough philosophy. He assumed his Muay Thai stance, hands high. Show us these deadly techniques for real, Master Seagal. The mocking tone in the title was deliberate, calculated to reclaim control of the narrative. The referee stepped forward uncertainly. Gentlemen, this isn't a sanctioned bout. Exhibition only. Ryder cut him off. No one's getting hurt. His eyes locked on Chuck. Right? Chuck and Seagal exchanged a glance, a silent communication, born of decades of shared understanding. Chuck nodded once, barely perceptible. Rules? Seagal inquired, still motionless while Suri bounced energetically before him. MMA rules. No eye gouges, no groin strikes. Everything else goes. Ryder's confidence grew with each word, familiar territory replacing the uncomfortable philosophical ground. Unless that's too much for... Fine, Chuck said simply. The referee glanced uncertainly toward the event coordinator, who stood helplessly at ringside. This was unprecedented, unplanned, potentially a massive liability issue. But it was also perhaps the most marketable moment in combat sports history. After a moment's hesitation, the coordinator gave a reluctant nod. The referee raised his hand. 3-minute exhibition round. At my command, you stop immediately. Understood? 4 nods. Begin. For 3 heartbeats. Nobody moved. The crowd leaned forward as one, phones raised higher, breathing suspended. Then Ryder exploded forward. His attack was technically flawless. A fighter in his prime, muscles firing with championship precision. Left jab, right cross, followed by a crushing leg kick aimed at Chuck's thigh. The combination had felled opponents across multiple weight classes. Chuck moved. Not dramatically. Not with the theatrical avoidance of their earlier demonstration. This was something else entirely minimal, efficient, like water flowing around stone. Ryder's punches missed by millimeters. Not because he was inaccurate, but because Chuck simply wasn't where he expected him to be. The leg kick, powerful enough to deaden the nerves in most opponents' thighs, connected with nothing. Chuck had pivoted a subtle weight shift that brought his leg just beyond Ryder's range. Frustration flashed across Ryder's face. He pressed forward, throwing another combination faster this time, more committed. Hook, uppercut, spinning elbow techniques that had made him famous. Again, Chuck moved with impossible economy. No wasted motion, no drama, just not being where the strikes landed. Across the cage, Suri launched at Seagal with his signature flying knee, a technique that had rendered opponents unconscious in tournaments across Asia. Seagal didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped forward, into the attack, hands raising slightly. What happened next occurred so quickly. Many in the audience missed it. Seagal's hands touched Suri's leg, not grabbing, not striking, simply redirecting. Suddenly, Suri's momentum carried him past his target. He landed awkwardly, balance compromised, expression confused. Before he could recover, Seagal was behind him, not having moved quickly, but having moved correctly. A slight pressure on Suri's shoulder, barely a touch, and the Muay Thai champion found himself stumbling forward, saved from falling only by the cage itself. The arena remained eerily quiet. This wasn't the violent spectacle they'd expected. It was something both more subtle and more devastating. A demonstration of mastery so complete, it appeared almost mundane. Ryder's frustration mounted visibly. His attacks grew more aggressive, more committed, and consequently, more vulnerable. After a wild haymaker that connected with nothing but air, he found himself off balance. Chuck moved. For the first time, his action was decisive rather than reactive. A single step forward, a hand placed precisely against Ryder's extended arm, and suddenly the MMA champion was on the ground. Not thrown, not struck. Simply placed there by the physics of his own momentum. Ryder blinked up at Chuck. Genuine shock, replacing frustration. "How did you control?" Chuck said simply, extending a hand to help him up. "Not force." Ryder hesitated before accepting the hand. As he regained his feet, something changed in his expression, a flash of genuine curiosity breaking through the competitive mask. Suri, witnessing his fellow champion's fall, redoubled his efforts against Seagal. He launched a barrage of Muay Thai strikes, elbows, knees, the techniques that had made him world champion. Each was technically perfect. Each was delivered with championship speed and precision. None landed as intended. Seagal moved with uncanny efficiency. Not fast, not flashy, just correct. Every time Suri committed to a strike, Seagal wasn't there. Or worse, was exactly where he shouldn't be. The Aikido master never struck back. He simply ensured that Suri's own energy, his own commitment, worked against him. After a particularly aggressive combination that left him off balance, Suri found himself instinctively grabbing Seagal's sleeve to steady himself. The mistake was devastating. Seagal's hand rotated slightly, Barely a movement at all, and suddenly Suri's wrist was locked in a position that sent shooting pain up his arm. Not injury, just unmistakable control. Seagal could have broken the joint with minimal effort. Instead, he simply held it, his eyes meeting Suri's with calm certainty. "This is Aikido," Seagal said quietly. "Not for cameras, for life." The referee stepped forward, sensing the demonstration had reached its conclusion. "Time." The single word broke the spell. Seagal released Suri's wrist instantly, stepping back with a small nod of acknowledgement. Across the cage, Chuck had already moved away from Ryder, hands again relaxed at his sides. For several heartbeats, nobody spoke. The champions stood breathing heavily. Not from exertion, but from the psychological impact of what they'd experienced. The legends stood perfectly still, unchanged, unaffected, as if they'd done nothing more strenuous than take a casual stroll. Mason Holt's voice, when it finally broke the silence, had lost all theatrical enhancement. It was simply a man struggling to articulate what he'd witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what we just saw, but I believe we've witnessed something extraordinary tonight. Not a fight, something beyond fighting." The crowd remained hushed, as if in the presence of something sacred. Phones lowered slowly, their owners suddenly aware that no digital capture could convey what they'd just experienced. Tina Morales stepped forward, professional instinct returning. "Chuck, Stephen, would you care to share what just happened here?" Chuck looked at her, expression unchanged. "Nothing happened." He glanced at Ryder. "Just a reminder." "Of what?" Ryder asked, voice uncharacteristically subdued. "That fighting isn't about dominating someone else. It's about mastering yourself." Chuck's words were simple, direct, devoid of preaching. "You have tremendous skill, both of you. But skill without wisdom is just violence with better technique." Seagal nodded slightly. "In real combat, the goal isn't to defeat an opponent. It's to end conflict." Suri flexed his wrist, the memory of Seagal's control still fresh. "But you didn't even strike. How do you end conflict without attacking?" "By removing the need to attack," Seagal replied. "By controlling space, energy, intention." The crowd listened in reverent silence, witnessing a masterclass in martial philosophy delivered without pretension, without showmanship. Chuck turned toward Ryder. "You're good. Very good. But you're fighting for the wrong reasons." "I fight to win," Ryder stated. But the usual bravado was absent. "Winning is temporary," Chuck replied. "Mastery endures." With that simple statement, Chuck turned and headed toward the cage door, Seagal falling in beside him. They moved unhurriedly, with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized their demonstration. As they reached the gate, Ryder called out, "Wait!" The legends paused, turning back. Ryder stood in the center of the octagon, championship belt forgotten at his feet. For perhaps the first time in his professional career, he looked uncertain, the carefully constructed persona cracking to reveal something more authentic beneath. "Could you show me?" he asked. The question stripped of arrogance, almost childlike in its sincerity. Chuck and Seagal exchanged a glance, decades of shared understanding passing between them in an instant. "Tomorrow morning," Chuck said. 6 a.m. Desert Wind Dojo on Industrial Road. "No cameras," Seagal added. "No social media. No sponsors." Suri stepped forward, standing beside Ryder. "Me too?" The theatrical flair was gone from his voice, replaced by genuine inquiry. Chuck nodded once. Without another word, the legends exited the cage, making their way through the stunned crowd. No triumphant gestures. No playing to the cameras. Just two men who had said everything they needed to say without saying much at all. Behind them, in the center of the octagon, Ryder Kane and Suri Prazer stood silent, champions suddenly aware of how much they had left to learn. Dawn broke over Las Vegas, painting the desert sky in bands of orange and gold. The city still slept, recovering from another night of excess, casinos emptying of their last desperate gamblers. But on Industrial Road, far from the Strip's fading neon, two figures approached a nondescript building with Desert Wind Dojo written in simple lettering above the door. Ryder Kane parked his Ferrari with uncharacteristic care, glancing at his watch. 5:45 a.m. For perhaps the first time in his professional career, he was early for training. Beside him, Suri Prazer stifled a yawn, his usual flamboyance subdued by the early hour and the weight of last night's humbling experience. "You think they'll actually be here?" Suri asked, voice low as they approached the entrance. Ryder nodded. "They'll be here." Something in his tone had changed. Since yesterday, the performative arrogance replaced by a quiet certainty. The dojo door was unlocked. They entered a space unlike any training facility they'd experienced before. No mirrors, no logos, no high-tech equipment, just polished wooden floors, bare walls, and weapons mounted with reverent precision. The air smelled of sandalwood and discipline. At the center of the room, Chuck Norris and Seagal were already present, seated in meditation. Neither acknowledged the younger fighter's arrival. Their breathing deep and measured, eyes closed. Ryder and Suri exchanged uncertain glances before quietly removing their shoes and sitting awkwardly on the floor several feet away. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft sound of breathing and distant traffic. After what felt like an eternity, Chuck opened his eyes. "You're early," he observed. No judgment in his tone. "Good." Seagal's eyes remained closed for several more breaths before he too acknowledged their presence with a slight nod. "We, didn't know what to bring," Ryder said, gesturing at his gym bag. "I have gloves, wraps. You won't need them," Chuck interrupted gently. He rose to his feet with fluid economy, no wasted motion, no unnecessary strain. "Today isn't about fighting." Suri's brow furrowed. "But I thought—" "First lesson," Seagal interjected, his voice soft yet filling the space. "Stop thinking you know what comes next." The champions fell silent, suddenly aware of how out of place they felt. Here were no cameras, no announcers, no audience, just four men in an empty room and decades of difference between them. Chuck moved to the center of the floor. "Stand." A simple instruction, delivered without force. Ryder and Suri complied. Automatically assuming their fighting stances, Ryder balanced for MMA versatility. Suri, in traditional Muay Thai position. Chuck shook his head. "Not fighting stances. Just stand." The younger men straightened uncertainly, hands dropping to their sides. "Close your eyes," Seagal instructed, circling them slowly. "Feel your weight on the floor." Ryder suppressed an eye roll before complying. This seemed ridiculous philosophical nonsense that had nothing to do with actual fighting. But the memory of last night's humiliation was still fresh. He closed his eyes. "Where's your center of gravity?" Chuck asked. Ryder frowned behind closed eyes. "My core, obviously." "Don't tell me." "Feel it," Chuck replied. "Where is your weight resting right now? Where is your balance?" Ryder focused inward, suddenly aware that he was leaning slightly forward. Weight on the balls of his feet, always ready to attack, to press forward. "I'm forward," he admitted. "On my toes." Why? Chuck's question was simple, direct. Ryder had never considered it before. Because that's how you generate power. How you stay ready to attack. Attack, Seagal echoed, the word carrying no judgment. Always forward. Always pushing. Suri's eyes opened. That's how you win. Is it? Chuck asked, meeting his gaze steadily. Or is it how you exhaust yourself? For 2 hours, they worked on nothing but standing. Not stance. Not technique. Just presence. Awareness of weight. Of balance. Of breath. Chuck and Seagal made minimal corrections, a slight adjustment to Ryder's shoulders, a small shift in Suri's foot position. This is stupid, Ryder finally burst out. Frustration overcoming restraint. When do we get to the actual techniques? The stuff that matters in the cage? Chuck regarded him calmly. You have plenty of techniques. You have knockout power in both hands. You've mastered 5 different submissions. A pause. Did any of that help you yesterday? The question landed harder than any physical blow. Ryder's protest died on his lips. Your problem isn't technique, Seagal added. It's intention. Purpose. My purpose is winning, Ryder insisted. But the conviction was fading. Chuck shook his head. Winning is an outcome, not a purpose. He stepped closer. Why do you fight? The question caught Ryder off guard. He'd been asked about his fighting style, his training regimen, his diet, never his why. The rehearsed answers about being the best, about dominating his division, suddenly felt hollow. I don't know, he admitted. The honesty surprising even himself. That's your first real answer today, Chuck said, approval warming his tone. Not knowing is the beginning of learning. The morning continued with exercises that seemed absurdly basic to the champions. Breathing patterns, weight shifts, awareness drills. Nothing flashy. Nothing Instagram-worthy. Just fundamental awareness of body, of space, of energy. After a particularly frustrating sequence, Suri sighed. I've been fighting professionally for 12 years. I have 37 victories. Yes, Seagal acknowledged. And they've taught you to be an excellent competitor. He let the statement hang for a moment. Now it's time to learn how to be a martial artist. What's the difference? Suri challenged, some of his characteristic fire returning. A competitor fights others, Chuck explained. A martial artist fights himself. By mid-morning, both young fighters were physically and mentally exhausted. Not from exertion, but from the intense concentration required. They had thrown no punches, executed no kicks, performed no submissions. Yet both felt as if they'd completed the most demanding training session of their careers. Enough for today, Chuck announced. Same time tomorrow. Ryder blinked in surprise. You're offering more training? If you want it, Chuck replied simply. Why? Suri asked. After how we acted? After what we said about you? Seagal's expression remained neutral. Words mean little. Actions reveal character. You showed up at dawn, despite your embarrassment. That says more than any insult. Chuck nodded agreement. Pride is the heaviest weight to lift. You both carried it here anyway. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That deserves respect. As they prepared to leave, Ryder hesitated by the door. A. You both carried it here. Can I ask you something? Chuck nodded. Yesterday, in the cage, you could have humiliated us. Really made us look bad in front of everyone. He met Chuck's eyes directly. "Why didn't you?" "Humiliation teaches nothing," Chuck replied. "It only creates resentment." "But we deserved it," Suri admitted, surprising himself with the candor. "Maybe," Seagal acknowledged. "But deserving and needing are different things." He regarded them thoughtfully. "You didn't need more ego. You needed its opposite." The young champions left the dojo in silence, the Ferrari remaining parked as they walked together down Industrial Road, neither ready to return to their regular lives just yet. "You coming back tomorrow?" Suri finally asked. Ryder nodded slowly. "Yeah." "You?" "Yeah." A pause. "Don't post about this." "Wasn't planning to." Meanwhile, inside the dojo, Chuck and Seagal resumed their morning routine. No discussion of what had transpired, no self-congratulation, no comment on the champion's performance. Just the continuing discipline that had defined their lives for decades. "They might not come back," Seagal noted, after several minutes of silence. Chuck nodded. "Their choice." But at 5:30 the next morning, the Ferrari pulled up again. And the morning after that. And the one after that. Days stretched into weeks. The training evolved gradually from stillness to movement, from awareness to application. Techniques emerged not as ends in themselves but as expressions of underlying principles. Chuck's economy of motion, Seagal's redirection of energy. Power without tension. Control without domination. The champions' public personas began to shift, subtly at first, then more noticeably. Ryder's social media grew quieter, his posts less about self-promotion and more about appreciation. Suri's flamboyance remained, but tempered with a new authenticity that fans noticed immediately. Sports journalists speculated about the change. Rumors circulated about what had really happened that night in the octagon and afterward, but the four men maintained their silence, creating a private sanctuary of learning amid the public spectacle of professional fighting. 6 weeks after that fateful night, Ryder faced his next championship defense, a highly anticipated bout against a trash-talking contender who'd spent months insulting him online. The pre-fight press conference was scheduled for maximum drama, cameras positioned to capture the expected fireworks. The contender arrived with his usual entourage, launching immediately into rehearsed provocations. "Finally showing up, Kane? Been hiding since you got embarrassed by Grandpa Norris?" The assembled media leaned forward, phones raised, waiting for the explosive response that had characterized Ryder's previous career. It never came. Ryder regarded his opponent calmly. No anger in his expression. No performative outrage. When he spoke, his voice was measured, centered. "Saturday night, we'll share the cage. Today, I'll share my respect. You've earned your shot." He extended his hand across the table. The contender stared in confusion, the prepared insults withering under Ryder's unexpected composure. After an awkward moment, he shook the champion's hand, visibly thrown off his game plan. Tina Morales, covering the press conference for the network, couldn't contain her professional curiosity. "Ryder, fans have noticed a significant change in your approach since the incident with Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal. Care to comment on how that's affected your preparation for this fight?" Ryder considered the question carefully. "I've been fortunate to gain some perspective," he said finally. "Fighting isn't about dominating someone else. It's about mastering yourself." He smiled slightly, recognizing the borrowed wisdom. "I'm still working on it. Every day." The championship bout itself reflected the transformation. Ryder fought with precision rather than aggression, efficiency rather than showmanship. When victory came, a technical submission in the third round, his celebration was controlled, respectful. He helped his opponent up, spoke words of genuine appreciation, acknowledged the skill he'd faced. The crowd, initially confused by the champion's transformed demeanor, responded with growing appreciation. Respect, it turned out, was contagious. In Bangkok 2 weeks later, Suri Prasert's championship defense followed a similar pattern. The once theatrical fighter still entered with his traditional Muay Krua dance, still acknowledged his heritage with pride. But the mocking arrogance was gone, replaced by authentic presence. His fighting style remained spectacular flying knees, spinning elbows, all the techniques that had made him champion, but now executed with purpose rather than purely for show. After his victory, Suri bowed to each corner of the arena, to his opponent, to his coaches. In his post-fight interview, speaking Thai to his home crowd, he expressed gratitude not only for his success, but for his recent lessons in humility. True strength, he told the surprised interviewer, comes not from defeating others, but from controlling yourself. The transformation of both champions became the story of the fighting world that season. Sports psychologists speculated about competitive evolution. Coaches analyzed the technical adjustments. Social media debated whether the changes would extend their careers or cut them short. But in a quiet dojo on Industrial Road, none of that mattered. There, in the hours before dawn, two champions continued to learn what they'd never known they were missing, the ancient, essential truth that had always lived beneath the flashy surface of their art. True mastery is silent, and silence, properly understood, speaks volumes. The Las Vegas sun had barely cleared the eastern mountains when Ryder Kane's Ferrari pulled into the Desert Wind Dojo parking lot. 3 months had passed since that fateful night in the Grand Arena. 3 months of dawn sessions, of fundamentals that felt foreign, of philosophical concepts that had initially seemed irrelevant to fighting but now informed every aspect of his approach. Today was different, though. Today was goodbye. Suri Prasert waited by the entrance, having flown in from Thailand, specifically for this morning. His championship belt remained secure after 2 more successful defenses, each marked by the new composure that had become his trademark. The two fighters, once driven by ego and separated by competitive rivalry, now greeted each other with genuine warmth. "Ready for this?" Suri asked quietly. Ryder exhaled slowly. "Not really. You?" "No." A pause. "But it's time." They entered the dojo together, finding Chuck and Seagal already present, as they had been every morning, sometimes instructing, sometimes merely observing, always present in a way that transcended physical proximity. Today, a small pot of tea sat between them on the floor. 4 cups arranged with precise geometry. The sight, so simple yet so intentional, triggered an unexpected tightness in Ryder's throat. "Sit," Chuck invited, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. The champions complied, settling into the cross-legged positions that had once felt awkward, but now came naturally. Silence stretched between the 4 men, comfortable rather than strained. Seagal poured tea with deliberate movements, the ceremony itself a lesson in mindfulness. "You're leaving," he stated, no question in his tone. Ryder nodded. "My training camp starts next week. Different time zone. And I have commitments in Bangkok," Suri added. "Promotional obligations, sponsorship events." Chuck received this information with a single nod. The world continues. Another silence, broken only by the soft sound of tea being sipped. "We wanted to thank you," Ryder said finally, the words inadequate for the transformation he'd experienced. "For everything." Seagal's expression remained inscrutable. "What exactly did we give you?" The question wasn't dismissive, but genuinely inquiring, prompting reflection rather than gratitude. Suri considered carefully. "Perspective," he answered finally. I thought I understood fighting because I understood winning. And now? Chuck prompted. Now I understand. I barely understand anything, Suri admitted, a smile softening the self-criticism. But I'm finally asking better questions. Ryder nodded agreement. Before, fighting was about dominating someone else, proving something. He met Chuck's steady gaze. Now it's about discovering something in myself through the challenge. Chuck set down his teacup. Good answers. But incomplete, Seagal added, no judgment in his tone. The journey continues, Chuck acknowledged. As it should. Morning light streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Outside, Las Vegas was awakening to another day of manufactured spectacle. Inside, 4 men shared a moment of authentic connection that no camera would capture. No social media post would document. We have something for you, Ryder said, reaching into his bag. He withdrew a small wooden box, hand-carved with intricate detail. It's not much, but... Chuck accepted the gift with a nod of acknowledgement, opening it carefully. Inside lay 2 simple black belts, no stripes, no embroidered names, no decorative elements. Just the traditional symbol of mastery, devoid of ego or showmanship. We know you both have more belts than you could ever need, Suri explained. These aren't for your walls or display cases. They're reminders, Ryder continued. Every time we compete now, we'll be wearing these under our official belts, not visible to anyone else. Just a personal reminder of what you taught us. For the first time that morning, emotion flickered briefly across Chuck's face. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. A moment of genuine recognition. The best teachings, he said quietly, are the ones that stay private, between teacher and student. He closed the box carefully. Thank you. Seagal inclined his head slightly. The belt means nothing, as you know. It's what's underneath that matters, Suri acknowledged. We understand that now. Not fully, Seagal corrected gently. But you've begun. That's enough. The tea ceremony concluded with the same mindful attention with which it had begun. As they rose to their feet, the usual training session conspicuously absent, Chuck regarded his students with quiet intensity. You'll continue your public lives, he observed. Championships. Interviews. Social media. Both fighters nodded. Remember this, Chuck said, his Texas drawl giving weight to the simple words. What happens in the spotlight is only the surface. Real growth happens in the dark, when no one's watching. Like dawn in an empty dojo, Ryder said softly. Chuck nodded once. Exactly like that. The goodbye was characteristically understated. No dramatic speeches. No emotional embraces. Just 4 men who had shared something authentic, acknowledging its value without needing to inflate its significance. Hands were clasped, brief nods exchanged, respect flowing in both directions. At the door, Suri turned back. Will we see you again? Seagal's expression remained neutral. Perhaps. If paths cross naturally. But don't seek us out, Chuck added. What needed to be shared has been shared. The rest, Seagal concluded, you'll find within yourselves. The champions departed, as they had arrived, changed in ways visible only to the discerning eye. The Ferrari pulled away quietly, neither man feeling the need to fill the silence with unnecessary words. Strange, Suri commented finally, as Las Vegas receded in the rearview mirror. 3 months ago, I would have filmed every session, posted every insight, leveraged the connection for followers. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have understood what actually mattered. Ryder agreed. Inside the dojo, Chuck and Seagal resumed their morning meditation, the wooden box placed carefully aside. No discussion of what had transpired. No analysis of the students' progress. Just the continuing discipline that had defined their lives for decades. Later that week, Tina Morales secured an exclusive interview with Ryder Kane ahead of his upcoming title defense. The network had promoted it extensively, promising insights into the champion's transformation. "Your entire approach has changed since that night, with Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal," Tina observed, professional curiosity evident. "Fans want to know, what exactly happened? What did they teach you?" Ryder considered the question, remembering Chuck's words about what happens in the spotlight versus the dark. "They reminded me of something I'd forgotten," he said finally. "Something essential that got lost in championships and sponsorships." "And what was that?" Tina pressed. Ryder smiled slightly. "If I could explain it in an interview, it wouldn't be worth learning." The response wasn't what the network had hoped for, but something in Ryder's authentic presence made it compelling nonetheless. Viewers noticed. Comments flooded the video. "Never thought I'd respect Kane more for saying less. Anyone else feel like we're watching a completely different fighter? Whatever those legends did, it worked." Suri faced similar questions upon returning to Thailand. Reporters, fans, even his own promotional team pressed for details about the secret training with Seagal. His responses mirrored Ryder's in substance, if not in style. Authentic acknowledgement without exploitation of the connection. When a particularly persistent reporter demanded specific techniques he'd learned, Suri smiled. "The most valuable technique," he replied, "is learning when not to speak." The fighting world continued its cycle of hype and spectacle. New contenders emerged. Controversies flared and faded. Social media algorithms amplified drama and conflict, as they were designed to do. Yet, within this ecosystem, Ryder Kane and Suri Prasert had become something unexpected, centers of quiet authenticity amid the noise. Their fights remained technical masterpieces, their skills undiminished. But the arrogance was gone, replaced by a presence that fans found increasingly compelling. Their mutual respect evolved into genuine friendship, transcending the competitive divisions of their sports. Occasionally, when schedules aligned, they trained together, sessions closed to cameras, free from documentation, focused on growth rather than content creation. Chuck and Seagal continued their private lives, declining interviews about their famous students, refusing to capitalize on the connection. When pressed by particularly insistent journalists, Chuck's response was characteristically minimal. "They're good men. Good fighters. The rest is private." 6 months after their farewell at Desert Wind Dojo, following another successful title defense, Ryder found himself at a charity event in Los Angeles. As he navigated the crowded reception, a familiar presence registered at the periphery of his awareness. Chuck Norris stood by the far wall, characteristically understated in a simple suit, observing rather than participating in the social performance around him. Their eyes met across the room. No words were exchanged. No acknowledgement necessary, beyond a slight nod from the elder, returned by the younger. Later that evening, a social media influencer approached Ryder, phone raised for a selfie. "You know Chuck Norris is here? We should get a pic with him." The internet would explode. Ryder smiled politely but shook his head. "Some connections aren't meant for public consumption." The influencer looked confused. "But think of the engagement." "I am," Ryder replied simply. "Just not the kind you mean." Across the room, Chuck witnessed the exchange. No reaction crossed his face. But as he departed shortly after, there was a slight nod toward his former student, a silent acknowledgement of a lesson truly learned. True mastery is silent. Arrogance fades where experience endures. The most important victories are the ones no one sees. 1 year to the day after that fateful night in the Las Vegas Grand Arena, Ryder Kane stood alone in the Desert Wind Dojo. Early morning light, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The space remained unchanged, no mirrors, no logos, no high-tech equipment. Just wooden floors, bare walls, and weapons mounted with reverent precision. Chuck and Seagal were not present. They hadn't been for months. The dojo itself had been quietly purchased by Ryder and Suri, preserved exactly as it had been during their training, a sanctuary of authenticity in a city built on illusion. Ryder moved through a series of forms not for cameras or competition, but for himself. Each movement carried the economy he'd learned from Chuck, the flow he'd absorbed from Seagal. No wasted energy. No performative flourishes. Just pure expression of disciplined intent. The door opened softly. Suri entered, dropping his travel bag by the entrance and removing his shoes with practiced respect. He'd flown in from Bangkok specifically for today's anniversary, declining 3 promotional opportunities and a lucrative exhibition match to make the journey. "Started without me?" he asked, a smile warming his features. Ryder completed his form before acknowledging his friend. "Just warming up. How was the flight?" "Long. Worth it." Suri glanced around the empty dojo. "Feels strange being here without them." "They're here," Ryder replied simply. "Just not physically." Suri nodded, understanding. Over the past year, both men had integrated their lessons so deeply that the distinction between teacher and teaching had begun to dissolve. Chuck's economy of motion, Seagal's redirection of energy. These weren't just techniques anymore, but principles that informed every aspect of their approach to fighting, to fame, to life itself. They began their training session without discussion, falling into the rhythms established during those dawn lessons. No words necessary. No instruction needed. 2 champions moving in harmony, neither leading nor following, each supporting the other's growth. An hour later, as they sat in meditation, Suri broke the comfortable silence. "We never really thanked them properly." Ryder opened his eyes. "I'm not sure they wanted thanks." "No," Suri agreed, "but gratitude should be expressed, even if it's not expected." "What did you have in mind?" Suri smiled. "I've been thinking about that for months." Later that day, they met with Mason Holt, the veteran announcer, whose voice had narrated their careers for years. Now semi-retired, Mason had transitioned to producing documentary content for the fighting world, his insights respected across the industry. "A documentary about that night?" Mason clarified, sipping coffee in his Las Vegas office. "That's not much footage to work with." "It's not about the footage," Ryder explained. "It's about the impact, the transformation," Suri added. "Not just ours. The ripple effect." Mason considered this. "You're both still at the top of your divisions. Viewership for your fights is higher than ever, despite or maybe because of your changed approach." He leaned forward. "People are fascinated by authentic growth. It's rare in this industry. That's why the timing is right," Ryder said. "Not to exploit the connection with Chuck and Seagal, but to honor the principles they represent." "Principles like?" Mason prompted. "Mastery over showmanship," Suri replied. "Substance over spectacle. Control rather than domination," Ryder added. "Fighting yourself instead of others." Mason nodded slowly. "Professional instincts engaging. It's compelling. But will Chuck and Seagal participate?" "They've declined every interview request about that night." "We're not asking them to participate," Ryder clarified. "This isn't about them personally. It's about what they represent. A lineage of martial arts philosophy that's getting lost in modern competition. A reminder Suri continued, that beneath the sponsorships and social media and pay-per-view numbers, there's something deeper, something that actually matters. Mason's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine curiosity. You know, he said finally, in 40 years of covering combat sports, I've never seen two champions at the height of their careers focus on legacy over leverage. He set down his coffee cup. I'm in. Production began quietly, without press releases or social media announcements. Unlike standard fighting documentaries with their dramatic music and hyperbolic narration, this project took a different approach, contemplative, nuanced, focused on the philosophical underpinnings of martial arts, rather than its spectacular surface. Fighters across disciplines were interviewed not just about that specific night, but about the tension between competitive success and martial integrity. Coaches spoke about the challenge of developing champions who remained connected to the deeper traditions of their arts. Footage from Ryder's and Suri's recent fights illustrated the evolution in their approaches. Technical proficiency married to philosophical awareness. Chuck and Seagal, as expected, declined formal interviews. Their presence in the documentary would remain limited to the original footage from that night, supplemented by archival material from their respective careers. Their silence was respected rather than circumvented itself, a lesson in the project's central theme. 6 months into production, as the documentary neared completion, Ryder received an unexpected message. Chuck Norris wanted to meet. No explanation. No context. Just a request for a conversation at the dojo the following morning. Dawn found Ryder waiting nervously. The space prepared with the same care he'd always shown during training. When Chuck arrived, he entered with the same quiet economy that characterized everything. He did no fanfare, no announcement, simply present one moment where he hadn't been before. Thank you for coming, Ryder said, bowing slightly from habit. Chuck nodded acknowledgement. I heard about your documentary. Ryder tensed involuntarily. We're not exploiting the connection. We've been careful to... Chuck raised a hand, the gesture stopping Ryder mid-sentence. I know. The tension eased slightly. They moved to the center of the floor, sitting across from each other as they had during those dawn training sessions. Stephen and I have discussed it. Chuck continued. We've watched the preliminary cut. Ryder blinked in surprise. How did you... Mason Holt is an old friend, Chuck explained. He thought we should see it before making a final decision about participation. I understand if you don't want to be involved, Ryder said quickly. The project is about principles, not personalities. We can focus on... We'll participate, Chuck interrupted gently, under specific conditions. The statement was so unexpected that Ryder momentarily lost his composure. You will? Both of you? Chuck nodded once. The message matters. More than our privacy. What conditions? Ryder asked. Professional wariness returning. 3. Chuck stated simply. First, no personal questions. No background about our lives, our careers, our personal philosophies. The focus stays on the principles, not on us. Ryder nodded immediately. Agreed. Second, we speak only once. At the end, our silence throughout the rest of the documentary remains intact. The lesson isn't in our words, but in what happened that night. Absolutely. Ryder agreed. That's exactly the approach we've been taking. Third, Chuck concluded. No promotion featuring us. No. Chuck Norris breaks his silence headlines. No special billing. No leveraging of our names for viewership. This third condition gave Ryder pause not because he disagreed, but because it contradicted every marketing principle in modern media. Still, He nodded firmly. Done. These are the same boundaries we've tried to maintain throughout production. Chuck regarded him steadily. Weathered face, revealing nothing of his thoughts. After a moment he nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw in the younger fighter's eyes. Tomorrow. Noon. The old soundstage on Charleston Boulevard. 1 hour, 1 camera. Stephen will be there. He rose smoothly to his feet. No retakes. One conversation. Captured authentically. We'll be ready. Ryder promised, standing as well. Thank you for... But Chuck was already moving toward the door. The conversation complete in his estimation. At the threshold he paused briefly. You've changed, he observed. No judgment in his tone. Both of you. Before Ryder could respond, Chuck was gone as quietly as he'd arrived. The interview the following day unfolded exactly as Chuck had specified. 1 camera. 1 conversation. No dramatic lighting. No stylized setting. Just 4 men sitting together in the stripped-down soundstage. What transpired wasn't the standard interview format of question and answer, but rather a genuine dialogue about martial arts philosophy, about the tension between spectacle and substance, about the difference between fighting for others versus mastering oneself. Chuck and Seagal spoke sparingly, but precisely. Decades of knowledge distilled into carefully chosen words. When asked why they'd agreed to participate after a year of silence, Seagal's response was characteristically direct. Because it's not about us. It's about what was missing. And what was that? Mason asked from behind the camera. Chuck answered. Respect. For the art. For its purpose. For its lineage. A pause. For yourself. The interview concluded with a question that had haunted both champions since that night in the arena. Why help us? After how we behaved, the things we said, why bother? Chuck and Seagal exchanged a glance, that same silent communication, born of shared understanding. Because someone did the same for us. Chuck replied simply. Years ago. The circle continues, Seagal added. As it should. With that, the interview ended. No dramatic conclusions. No emotional farewells. Just the quiet certainty of a conversation complete. 6 weeks later, The Legacy of Silence premiered not with a red carpet event or promotional blitz, but with a private screening attended by a carefully selected audience of fighters, coaches, and martial arts practitioners across disciplines. The documentary unfolded as a meditation rather than a spectacle. Opening with footage from that night in the arena, it expanded outward to explore the philosophical underpinnings of martial arts, the psychological components of true mastery, the distinction between competitive success and deeper achievement. Chuck and Seagal appeared only at the end, their presence carrying the weight of decades of experience. Their words were few but resonant, focused not on themselves but on the principles that had guided their lives. Fighting isn't about defeating someone else. It's about mastering yourself. True strength doesn't announce itself. It simply endures. Victory over others is temporary. Victory over yourself is permanent. The documentary concluded not with dramatic music or inspirational platitudes, but with silence, 30 seconds of the empty dojo at dawn. Light gradually filling the space, nothing happening yet everything present. When the lights came up after the screening, the audience remained seated, processing what they'd witnessed. The usual immediate reactions, applause, commentary, social media posting were notably absent. People simply sat, thoughtful, some nodding slowly to themselves. As the audience finally began to disperse, a young fighter approached Ryder and Suri. No more than 20. Already showing the confidence of early success, He hesitated before speaking. That was different, he said finally. Not what I expected. Ryder nodded. Different was the point. All that philosophical stuff. The fighter continued, struggling to articulate his thoughts. Does it actually help? In the cage, I mean. When it matters. Suri smiled slightly. It doesn't help you win fights. The young fighter frowned. Then what's the point? It helps you understand why you're fighting in the first place, Ryder explained. And sometimes, that's more important than winning. The young fighter looked skeptical but thoughtful. Would you guys be willing to talk more sometime? About all this? Ryder and Suri exchanged a glance, remembering their own journey from arrogance to awareness. Dawn, Suri said simply. Desert Wind Dojo. No cameras. No social media. Just bring yourself, Ryder added. The real one, not the one you show everyone else. The young fighter nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes. The first glimmer of recognition that there might be more to his chosen path than trophies and followers. 3 months after the release, a trend began to emerge across combat sports, subtle but unmistakable. The most theatrical trash-talking decreased. Pre-fight respect increased. Post-fight acknowledgments grew more genuine. Not universally, not completely, but noticeably. One morning, as Ryder practiced alone in the dojo, a familiar presence registered at the periphery of his awareness. Your technique has improved, Chuck observed from the doorway. But more importantly, your intention has clarified. Ryder completed his form before responding, a smile touching his lips. I had good teachers. You were ready to learn, Chuck corrected. That's more rare than good teaching. They moved to the center of the floor, sitting in comfortable silence as morning light gradually filled the space. After several minutes, Ryder spoke. I've been thinking about what you said, about why you helped us. He met Chuck's steady gaze. You said someone did the same for you. Who was it? Chuck's weathered face revealed a flash of something memory, perhaps, or appreciation for the circle's continuation. A master in Korea, he said finally. When I was stationed there with the Air Force, I challenged him publicly, disrespectfully. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He taught me many lessons. The most important wasn't about fighting. What was it about? Ryder asked. Listening, Chuck replied simply. To others. To yourself. To silence. The answer resonated through the empty dojo, not just words but embodied truth. Principles lived rather than merely spoken. As early morning light filled the dojo completely, Chuck rose to his feet. Time to continue your work, he said, moving toward the door. Will I see you again? Ryder asked. Chuck paused, glancing back with characteristic economy. When necessary. With that, he was gone as quietly as he'd arrived. Ryder remained seated at the center of the empty dojo, surrounded by silence, yet feeling profoundly connected. To Chuck and Seagal. To Suri. To the young fighters now beginning their own journeys of discovery. To the unbroken lineage of martial arts philosophy that transcended time, transcended ego, transcended the temporary nature of championships and acclaim. He closed his eyes, breath deepening, mind clearing. In the silence, everything that mattered was present. In the stillness, everything essential was clear. True mastery speaks without words. True strength needs no announcement. The most important victories are the ones no one sees. The circle continues. As it should. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.